She was staring at the man kneeling in front of her, holding a small framed sketch that had traveled from a Chicago conference room to a Vermont stone wall and back again, and she understood, with the particular clarity that only comes after surviving something, that the best things in her life had started with a mistake, a wrong elevator button, to be specific. But to understand how they got there, standing in November wind on a waterfront that was about to become something extraordinary, you need to go back to a Monday morning in October when everything was perfectly, deceptively ordinary, wishing you a day full of joy and good luck. Before we begin, let us know in the comments which city you are watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Ethan Cole stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the 32nd floor conference room and watched the Chicago River move below him, gray and unhurried, the way rivers move when they have no idea that something catastrophic is happening directly above them. The waterfront site was visible from here if you knew where to look, a long stretch of lakefront property that had taken his firm 4 years to secure. 300 pages of environmental compliance documentation, and more sleepless nights than he had counted. In 6 weeks, ground was supposed to break on what would become the most significant public waterfront development in Chicago's history. A mixed-use space with public green areas, affordable housing, a performing arts pavilion, and a design that had already won 2 national awards before a single foundation had been poured. $700 million. 200 jobs, and his father's name quietly in the cornerstone. Ethan turned from the window. The conference room table held 3 things: a legal filing that was 340 pages long, a cup of coffee that had gone cold 40 minutes ago, and an empty chair. The chair belonged to Margaret Voss. Maggie had been with Cole and Mercer Architecture since the beginning, since the days when the firm operated out of a 2-room office in Wicker Park, and Ethan was still paying off his graduate school loans. She was 62 years old, had the organizational precision of a military strategist, and knew every detail of the waterfront case from the first environmental survey to the most recent contractor invoice. She had been preparing for this arbitration hearing for 3 months. Her phone went to voicemail. Ethan's assistant, Marcus, appeared in the doorway. Marcus was 26, efficient, and had the particular expression of someone delivering news they would prefer not to deliver. Her apartment, Marcus said. I sent someone over. Her car is gone. The neighbor has her cat. Her office computer was wiped clean sometime between 11 p.m. last night and 6 a.m. this morning. Ethan was quiet for a moment. She didn't leave voluntarily. Marcus did not argue with this. The arbitration panel convenes in 93 minutes. Victor Hale's legal team arrived 40 minutes ago. They brought 4 attorneys. Ethan looked at the empty chair. Victor Hale, the man who had been his mentor for 8 years, who had taught him how to read a contract and how to read a room, who had shaken his hand at the waterfront project announcement and said, with every appearance of sincerity, that Ethan deserved it. The man who had then spent the following 6 months constructing a 340-page lie. The complaint alleged that Cole and Mercer had fabricated environmental compliance reports and bribed 2 city officials to secure the waterfront contract. It was detailed, documented, and almost entirely invented. Almost, because whoever had built the case was skilled enough to use real transactions, real dates, and real names, and then alter just enough to make everything look wrong. Ethan had known it was fabricated from the moment he read it. The problem was proving it. The bigger problem was that the only person who could walk into that arbitration room and methodically dismantle the case, document by document, was currently missing. He picked up his cold coffee, looked at it, and put it back down. 92 minutes. What he did not know, what he could not have known, was that 4 floors below him, An elevator door was about to open in entirely the wrong place. Sloane Whitfield had been at Cole and Mercer Architecture for exactly 3 weeks and 2 days, and she had not yet figured out which elevator went to the fourth floor without stopping at every floor between the lobby and 12. This was, she would later reflect, a failure of spatial awareness that changed her entire life. She stepped into the elevator at 7:58 and carrying a rolled tube of architectural blueprints under one arm, a canvas tote bag overflowing with project folders under the other, and a travel coffee cup that she had already spilled on her left sleeve somewhere between the parking garage and the lobby. The coffee had been hot. The sleeve was cream-colored. The morning was going extremely well. She pressed what she believed was the button for the fourth floor. The elevator rose. It did not stop at 4. It stopped at 12. The doors opened, and Sloane stepped out with the automatic confidence of someone who has not yet realized they are in the wrong place, and walked directly into the Cole and Mercer Executive Conference Room, where the arbitration hearing for the most significant legal dispute in the firm's history was 7 minutes from beginning. The room was full. 3 arbitration panel members sat at the far end of the long table, their expressions carrying the particular patience of people who are paid to wait but prefer not to. To the left, 4 attorneys from Hale Development Group were arranged with the quiet precision of people who had already decided how this was going to end. Their lead attorney, a woman in a charcoal suit with silver earrings and the composed expression of someone who had never in her life pressed the wrong elevator button, looked up from her prepared documents. To the right, Ethan Cole stood at the window with his back to the room. Marcus stood near the door. Sloane walked in. The rolled tube of blueprints, which had been balanced under her arm with the structural integrity of a building designed by someone who had not slept, chose this moment to unroll. It did so with considerable enthusiasm, sliding across the conference table and covering approximately half of the documents that Hale's lead attorney had spent the morning organizing. The room went silent. Sloane looked at the blueprints. She looked at the room. She looked at the 4 attorneys staring at her from behind their now buried documents. She looked at the arbitration panel. She looked at the man at the window, who had turned around and was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately classify. She began gathering the blueprints. "I am so sorry," she said, rolling them back up with the focused urgency of someone trying to undo something that could not be undone. "Wrong floor. I pressed. The button was, 'I am on 4. I work on 4. I was just—'" Finally, the voice came from the lead attorney, who had retrieved her documents from beneath the blueprints with 2 fingers. The way you retrieve something from a situation you find beneath you. Her voice was smooth and precisely calibrated. "I was beginning to think Cole and Mercer was going to send a potted plant." Sloane stopped rolling the blueprints. She looked at the attorney. She looked at the panel. She looked at the empty chair on the Cole and Mercer side of the table. The chair that was clearly meant for someone who was not here. She looked at Ethan Cole. He was watching her with the expression she had not been able to classify before, and she could classify it now. It was the expression of a man who had run out of options and was watching one walk through the door carrying a tube of blueprints and a coffee-stained sleeve. The panel chair looked at his watch. "We begin in 6 minutes. Is the respondent's representative present?" Ethan opened his mouth. Sloane said, "Yes." The word came out before she had fully decided to say it. It sat in the air between her and the rest of the room and everyone in the room, including Sloane, waited to see what she would do with it. "Could I have 5 minutes?" she said. "Before we begin. Just 5." The panel chair looked at the opposing attorney. The opposing attorney, Diana Cross, her nameplate read, Diana Cross of Hale Development's legal team, smiled the smile of someone who was not threatened by 5 minutes. "Of course," Diana said. "Take your time." Sloane picked up her tote bag, tucked the blueprints under her arm, and walked to the door. She looked back once at Ethan Cole. He followed her into the hallway. The hallway outside the conference room was all glass and pale wood, overlooking the river on one side and the open office floor on the other. Sloane set her tote bag on the floor, leaned her blueprints against the wall, and turned to face the man who was, according to the nameplate she had just read, Ethan Cole, founder and chief executive officer of the firm she had worked at for 3 weeks and 2 days. He was taller than she had expected. She had seen him twice before, once in the lobby when she was starting orientation, once in a hallway when he was on a phone call, and both times he had been moving too fast to look at properly. Now he was standing still, and she could see that he was somewhere in his late 30s, with the kind of face that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood structural integrity, and that he was, beneath the composure, genuinely frightened. She had not expected that. It made her feel, unexpectedly, less frightened herself. "Tell me what is happening," she said. "All of it. Quickly," he told her. Victor Hale. The fabricated compliance reports, the altered payment records, the 340-page complaint. Maggie Voss gone since some time before 6 a.m. The arbitration panel that would rule in Hale's favor by default, if no one sat in that chair in 4 minutes. Sloane listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "I am a junior architect. I have been here for 3 weeks. I have never been in an arbitration hearing. I am not an attorney. I am not qualified for this. I know." "Then why are you looking at me like that?" "Because you are here," Ethan said, "and because the alternative is walking back in there and telling the panel that Cole and Mercer has no representation, at which point they rule for Hale. The project dies. 200 people lose their jobs, and a waterfront that was supposed to be public green space becomes another private luxury tower." Sloane was quiet for a moment. 200 people, she said. "Most of them have been with the firm for years. Some of them have been here longer than I have." She looked at the conference room door. Through the glass she could see Diana Cross reviewing her notes with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had already written the ending. "I am not doing this for you, Mr. Cole," Sloane said. "I want to be clear about that. I don't know you." "Understood. I am doing this because 200 people, who also don't know me, apparently need someone to sit in that chair." "Also understood." She picked up her tote bag. She straightened her coffee-stained sleeve with the dignity of someone who had decided the stain was no longer relevant. She looked at him once more. "I need your complete project files, every document, every report, every contractor invoice, every correspondence, on my laptop in the next 3 minutes. Marcus can, and someone needs to find me a clean blouse." She paused. "Please." Ethan almost smiled. It was the smallest possible version of a smile, barely a movement at the corner of his mouth, but it was there. "Marcus," he said, without looking away from her. "Blouse, 4th floor, her size, 2 minutes." From somewhere down the hallway, Marcus said, "On it." Sloane picked up her blueprints. "What is the name of their lead attorney?" "Diana Cross. 15 years of corporate litigation. She has never lost a case she considered important." "Does she consider this one important?" "She flew in from New York this morning." Sloane nodded. "Good," she said. "I prefer when people take things seriously." She pushed open the conference room door and walked back in. Ethan stood in the hallway for exactly 2 seconds. Then he followed her. What neither of them knew, what they could not have known, was that on the other side of the building, in a black car parked on the street below, a man was watching the conference room windows through a pair of field glasses and speaking quietly into a phone. "She is still in there," the man said, and the person on the other end of the call said, "Find out who she is." Diana Cross opened the morning session the way a surgeon opens a procedure, with precision, without hurry, and with the complete confidence of someone who has done this many times before and expects the same result. The respondent, Cole and Mercer Architecture, she began, her voice filling the room with the ease of someone accustomed to being listened to, was awarded the Chicago Lakefront Waterfront Development contract in March of this year following a competitive bidding process. What the city did not know at the time of the award was that Cole and Mercer's winning bid was supported by environmental compliance documentation that had been substantially altered from the original survey findings. She moved to the first exhibit, a set of projected documents, clean and well organized, each one labeled and time-stamped. Furthermore, the panel will see evidence that two payments totaling $140,000 were made from Cole and Mercer corporate accounts to personal accounts belonging to city officials involved in the contract review process. These payments were disguised as contractor invoices. Murmurs from the panel. Diana, let them settle before continuing. Sloane was writing, not on her laptop, on a yellow legal pad she had found in her tote bag, in the small, precise handwriting of someone trained to annotate drawings. She was writing dates. She was writing names. She was writing the specific numbers Diana Cross had cited, and next to each one she was writing a question mark or a check mark, and the ratio of question marks to check marks was, so far, running about 4-to-1 in favor of question marks. Something was wrong with the timeline. She could feel it the way she could feel a structural problem in a building plan, not as a specific identified error, not yet, but as a wrongness in the overall logic. A place where the load did not distribute the way it should. Diana Cross finished her opening and turned to the panel. The complainant requests that the arbitration panel void the waterfront contract award and refer the matter to the city attorney's office for further investigation. The panel chair nodded. The respondent may address the panel. Sloane stood up. She had been given a clean blouse, white, fitted, delivered by Marcus with the efficiency of someone who had learned not to ask questions. She had changed in the restroom in 90 seconds. She looked, if not exactly like someone who belonged in this room, then at least like someone who had decided to be here. "Thank you," she said to the panel. "My name is Sloane Whitfield. I represent Cole and Mercer Architecture." She paused. "I want to start by acknowledging that the documents Hale Development has presented look, at first reading, very convincing. They are organized, they are detailed, and they use real names and real dates. That is precisely what makes them worth examining carefully." Diana Cross looked up from her notes. "The complainant's case rests on two pillars," Sloane continued. "First, that the environmental compliance reports were altered. Second, that two payments constituted bribes. I intend to address both. But before I do, I would like to ask a question about the timeline." She turned to her laptop and pulled up the project records. Marcus had transferred. The compliance reports were submitted to the city on March the 14th. The complainant alleges they were altered before submission. However, the metadata on the original survey files, which I have here from Cole and Mercer's internal server, shows the last modification date as February the 28th. She looked at Diana Cross. "That is 2 weeks before submission. Can the complainant explain why an allegedly fraudulent document would be altered 2 weeks before it was needed, and then left untouched?" Diana Cross said, "The alteration date in the metadata may not reflect the actual date of alteration. Metadata can be manipulated," Sloane said. "Yes, which is exactly my point." A beat of silence. The panel chair leaned forward slightly. Sloane continued. "The complainant is arguing that Cole and Mercer manipulated metadata to hide fraudulent alterations. I am arguing that someone manipulated metadata to create the appearance of fraudulent alterations. The question the panel needs to ask is not whether the metadata was manipulated. It clearly was. The question is who manipulated it, and when. Diana Cross set down her pen. It was a small gesture. Sloane noticed it. Furthermore, Sloane said, regarding the two payments the complainant has characterized as bribes, I recognize one of the names on those accounts. James Whitmore, Deputy Director of the city's Environmental Review Office. She looked at the panel. Mr. Whitmore was the keynote speaker at the Midwest Architecture and Sustainability Conference in February of this year. I attended that conference. I have his business card in my bag. She paused. He was there to accept an award for ethical leadership in municipal environmental oversight. The panel members exchanged a look. I am not suggesting that awards make people immune to corruption, Sloane said. I am suggesting that a man who accepted a public ethics award in February and then allegedly accepted a bribe in March is a man whose finances deserve very careful scrutiny. Scrutiny that I believe will show that the payment records the complainant has submitted are not what they appear to be. Diana Cross said, Objection. The respondent is making allegations without documentary support. I am making observations based on the documents the complainant submitted, Sloane replied. If those documents are accurate, the complainant should welcome scrutiny. If they are not, the panel should know that. The panel chair said, The panel will take a brief recess to review the initial filings. We will reconvene in 15 minutes. As the panel rose, Victor Hale, who had been sitting in the observers' section with the stillness of a man who is very good at waiting, stood up and left the room without looking at anyone. Sloane sat down. Her hands under the table were shaking. Ethan leaned toward her. His voice was low enough that only she could hear it. Where did you learn to do that? I didn't learn it, she said, keeping her eyes on her notes. I just read the documents. You read 340 pages of legal filings in 15 minutes. I read fast, she looked at him briefly. Also, I skipped the parts that were clearly filler. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, the conference. You actually went to that conference? I go to every conference I can afford. I grew up in Vermont. Conferences were how I learned what the rest of the world was doing. She turned back to her laptop. Tell me everything you know about those two payment records. Every detail. We have 14 minutes. He told her. And that was the moment. Not the entrance, not the wrong elevator, not the unrolled blueprints. That Ethan Cole understood he was in serious trouble. Not the legal kind, the other kind. The 15-minute recess became 45 when one of the panel members requested additional time to review the original contract filing. Diana Cross used the time to confer with her team in low, urgent voices. Ethan used it to make phone calls he did not explain. Sloane used it to go to the break room on the 12th floor, because she had not eaten since 6 a.m. and her brain, which was currently running at a pace she had not previously asked of it, required fuel. The break room was small and smelled of old coffee, and someone's reheated lunch. There was a bowl of apples on the counter, a coffee machine that looked like it had opinions about being used, and a table by the window where a man was eating a sandwich over an open laptop, with the focused intensity of someone who had forgotten the sandwich was there. He was somewhere around 30, with dark hair that suggested a morning routine consisting primarily of running his hands through it, and he was wearing a lanyard that identified him as Danny Park Structural Engineering, which Sloane recognized as the department on the 3rd floor that she had never had a reason to visit. She took an apple. She sat down across from him. He did not look up. You are the person from upstairs, he said. Without looking up, the one who walked into the arbitration. News travels fast. Marcus told everyone. He was either panicking or very excited. Hard to tell with Marcus. Danny finally looked up. He had the expression of someone who spent most of his time thinking about things that were not in the room. Are you actually doing it? Running the defense. Apparently. How is it going? I found a problem with their timeline. I don't know yet if it is enough. Danny nodded slowly. He looked back at his laptop. He looked at his sandwich. He looked at the laptop again. Then he reached into the canvas tote bag beside his chair, worn, faded, printed with a NASA logo that had seen better decades, and pulled out a folded paper napkin covered in handwritten numbers. He stared at it. I was going to throw this away, he said. Sloane looked at the napkin. What is it? I've been running numbers on the project payment history, off the books on my own time, because something felt wrong about the contractor invoices about 3 weeks ago, and I couldn't figure out what. He smoothed the napkin on the table. I thought I was imagining it. I almost didn't write it down. Sloane leaned forward. The napkin was covered in figures, transaction amounts, dates, vendor codes. Danny had circled 3 entries in red pen and drawn lines connecting them to a note in the margin that read, "Wrong vendor category, cross-reference original." "These 3 transactions," Danny said, pointing. "They show up in the complaint as personal payments to city officials. But when I pulled the original contractor database, the one from before the complaint was filed, these same transaction numbers are listed under a completely different vendor category. Legitimate construction subcontractors." Sloane looked at the numbers. She looked at the dates. She looked at the circled entries. "Someone changed the vendor codes," she said, "after the fact. The original entries are still in the backup server. I found them by accident when I was running a routine audit last week. The backup server hasn't been touched because nobody thought to touch it. It is the kind of thing you only find if you are looking for something else." Sloane picked up the napkin very carefully, the way you pick up something that might be fragile. "Danny, when were the vendor codes changed?" Danny pulled up his laptop. "The modification timestamp is April the 3rd, 2 weeks after the complaint was filed. The complaint was filed on March the 20th. Right. So someone filed a complaint alleging fraudulent payments, and then altered the records to support the complaint after the complaint was already filed. That is what the timestamps say." Sloane set the napkin down. She looked at Danny Park, who was looking at her with the expression of someone who had been carrying a piece of information he did not know was important and was only now beginning to understand what he had been holding. "Where is this backup server?" she said. "3rd floor. Server room B. It has been there for 4 years. Nobody uses it anymore because we migrated to cloud storage. Can you pull the complete original records? Everything, all contractor payments, all vendor codes, the full modification history." "I already did," Danny said. He reached into the NASA tote bag and produced a printed report, 40 pages, slightly crumpled from being folded into the bag. "I printed it this morning. I wasn't sure why. I just thought—" He stopped. "I thought someone should know." Sloane looked at the report. She looked at the napkin. She looked at Danny Park, who had found the foundation of the entire case in a backup server nobody used, written the key figures on a lunch napkin, and carried it around in a bag from a museum gift shop. "Danny," she said, "I need you to come upstairs with me." He looked at his sandwich. "I haven't finished." "Bring it." He brought it. They were halfway to the elevator when Sloane's phone vibrated against her palm, the screen lighting up with a number she did not recognize. She looked at it. She almost did not open the message. She did, and the apple she had been eating turned to nothing in her mouth. The message was 4 words. "Walk away. You are done." Sloane stopped in the hallway, outside the elevator. Danny walked 2 steps ahead of her before he realized she had stopped, and turned back with his sandwich still in his hand. "Everything okay?" "Give me a minute," she said. He gave her a minute. She read the message again. 4 words. No name. No explanation. The number was blocked, not just unlisted, but actively blocked. the kind of blocking that required effort and intention. She had received wrong numbers before, spam messages, the occasional misdirected group text. This was none of those things. This was a message sent by someone who knew exactly who they were sending it to, and exactly what they were asking her to stop doing. She had been in the arbitration room for less than 2 hours. The second message arrived before she could decide what to do with the first. It was a photograph. Sloane looked at it for a long time. Her mother's kitchen, the farmhouse in Vermont, the one her mother had spent 4 years fighting to keep, the one with the stone walls her grandfather had built, and the windows that let in the particular quality of morning light that Sloane had been trying to replicate in her architectural work ever since she left home. The photograph had been taken from inside the kitchen, near the back door, looking toward the window above the sink. On the counter, her mother's reading glasses, folded, a ceramic mug with a small chip on the handle that her mother refused to replace because her father had given it to her, a half-finished cup of tea still steaming. Someone had taken that photograph from inside her mother's kitchen. Someone was there right now. Sloane called her mother. The phone rang 3 times. 4, 5. Her mother answered on the 6th ring, slightly out of breath, with the background sound of someone who had just come in from outside. Sloane, you never call in the morning. Is everything all right? Mom. Sloane kept her voice even. Are you at home? Just came in from the garden. The back fence needs. Is anyone in the house? A pause. What do you mean? No, of course not. Why would go through every room right now while I am on the phone? Tell me what you see. Her mother went quiet for a moment, and then Sloane heard her moving through the house. The familiar sound of the old floorboards, the kitchen, the hallway, the living room. There is nobody here, Sloane. The doors were locked. I checked before I went out. Another pause. You are frightening me. I know. I am sorry. I just needed to be sure. Sloane closed her eyes briefly. Lock the back door. The one from the garden. Make sure the bolt is across. Not just the handle lock. Sloane. Please, Mom. I'll explain everything. Just do that first. She heard the bolt slide across. Her mother came back to the phone. Done. Now tell me what is happening. I can't tell you everything right now, but I need you to trust me for a few days. Can you do that? A long silence. Her mother had the particular silence of someone who is choosing between asking questions and trusting her daughter, and Sloane had always loved her for the fact that she usually chose the latter. How long have you been at this new job? Her mother said finally. 3 weeks. And already someone is sending you threatening messages. It is complicated. It always is with you. A breath. All right. I trust you. But Sloane, finish them. Sloane almost smiled. Working on it. She hung up. The third message had arrived while she was on the call. She makes tea at 7 every morning. Creature of habit. Easy to find. Sloane read it twice. Then she put her phone in her pocket and stood very still in the hallway for approximately 10 seconds, which was the amount of time she allowed herself to be frightened before she decided to be something else instead. Danny was still waiting, his sandwich now finished, his expression carefully neutral in the way of someone who has overheard enough to know something serious is happening, but is too polite to say so. I need you to go back to your desk, Sloane said. Pull every modification record from the backup server, every single one. Print 2 copies. Put one in your bag and one somewhere else. Somewhere that isn't your desk. Okay, Danny said. Are you? I am fine, she looked at him. Danny, thank you. For the napkin. For all of it. He nodded. He went to the elevator. He looked back once, and she could see that he was worried, and she appreciated it, and she could not afford to think about it right now. She turned and walked back toward the conference room. Ethan was in the hallway outside it, on his phone, and he looked up when he saw her face. He ended the call. "What happened?" he said. She showed him the photograph without speaking. He looked at it. His expression did not change in any dramatic way. It was a very controlled face, the face of someone who had learned to manage what it showed, but something shifted behind his eyes. Something that looked, she thought, like the specific anger of a person who does not tolerate innocent people being pulled into their battles. "How long ago did this arrive?" he said. "20 minutes. Your mother, is she?" "She is home. She is safe." "For now." Sloane took the phone back. "Whoever sent this knows her schedule. They know she makes tea at 7 a.m. They were inside the house, Ethan," she said, his first name without thinking about it, and neither of them remarked on it. "This is not a warning from someone who is bluffing." "No," he said, "it isn't. Maggie didn't leave voluntarily. You said that yourself this morning. And now someone is sending photographs of my mother's kitchen to make sure I don't ask too many questions about why." She looked at him steadily. "This is bigger than a contract dispute." "I know." "How much bigger?" He was quiet for a moment. "Victor Hale has been building this case for 6 months. He has people in this building. I don't know who. I don't know how many. He has connections to the city attorney's office and at least one person on the Environmental Review Board. He has been planning this very carefully for a very long time. And Maggie found out." "I think so." Sloane absorbed this. "Your mother's farmhouse," Ethan said. "I want to send security." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He said it simply, without drama, the way you say something that is obvious. "I want to. Give me the address." She looked at him for a long moment. He was watching her with the particular steadiness of someone who has made a decision, and is waiting for the other person to catch up. She gave him the address. "The panel reconvenes in 8 minutes," she said. "I know." "Then make the call fast." She went back into the conference room. She sat down. She opened her laptop and her legal pad and the 40-page report Danny had given her, and she arranged them with the focused precision of someone who was not thinking about the photograph of her mother's kitchen, and was absolutely thinking about the photograph of her mother's kitchen, and had decided that the best way to protect her mother was to win. The panel filed back in. Diana Cross looked at Sloane across the table with the composed expression of someone who had spent the recess receiving information she found useful. Sloane looked back. The real battle was just beginning. The afternoon session opened with Diana Cross presenting what she described as the cornerstone of the complainant's case. "Panel members," she said, moving to the projection screen with the unhurried confidence of someone saving the best for last. "The environmental compliance reports and the payment records are significant, but the most direct evidence of Cole and Mercer's knowing violation of the waterfront contract terms is this." The screen filled with architectural drawings. They were large format, detailed, the kind of drawings that take weeks to produce. Floor plans, site plans, elevation studies, all bearing the Cole and Mercer title block and project number. Diana Cross let the panel look at them for a moment before continuing. "These drawings, obtained through discovery, show that Cole and Mercer's design intentionally places two of the development's primary structures within the city's protected waterfront setback zone. The setback requirement was a condition of the contract award. These drawings prove that the firm was aware of the violation and proceeded regardless." The panel chair leaned forward, studying the projected images. Sloane was already looking at the drawings. She had been looking at them since the moment they appeared on the screen, and something was happening in her chest. Not panic, not yet, but the architectural equivalent of a wrong note in a familiar piece of music. A dissonance, a wrongness that she could feel before she could name. She looked at the title block, Cole and Mercer Architecture, Project Number WF, negative 2024, negative 001. The firm's standard font, the standard layout, the standard north arrow in the lower right corner. Except the north arrow was wrong. It was a small thing. The kind of thing that only someone who had spent years producing drawings in this specific firm's style would notice. Cole and Mercer used a particular north arrow, a simple, clean design that one of the firm's original drafters had created in the early years and that had become part of the firm's drawing standard. It had a specific proportion, a specific line weight, a specific relationship to the scale bar beside it. The north arrow on these drawings was close, very close, but the proportion was slightly off, and the line weight was slightly heavier, and the relationship to the scale bar was not quite right. Someone had copied the style. They had not copied it perfectly. Sloane kept her face neutral. She turned to Ethan. "Your phone," she said quietly. "Do you have the original waterfront design files?" He looked at her. "In my project folder." "Why?" "Pull up the site plan, the most recent version." He did. He held the phone low, between them, the screen angled so only she could see it. She held the phone beside her legal pad and looked at the north arrow on the screen, then at the north arrow on the projection. Then she stood up. "I would like to address the drawings the complainant has presented," she said. Diana Cross said, "The respondent will have an opportunity to respond after the complainant's full presentation." "I understand. However, I believe there is a foundational question about the authenticity of these drawings that the panel should consider before proceeding, because if the drawings are not authentic, the entire presentation built around them is not authentic either." The panel chair said, "Proceed, Miss Whitfield." Sloane walked to the projection screen. She stood beside it and looked at the drawings for a moment, and then she said something that she had heard her mother say once, about the stone walls on the Vermont property, about the way you could tell which sections had been built by her grandfather and which had been repaired by someone else. "A building tells you the truth about the person who designed it," Sloane said. "Every architect has a language, a set of habits, preferences, and standards that appear in their work, the way a writer's voice appears in their sentences. After enough time working within a firm's standards, you can read their drawings the way you read handwriting. You know what belongs and what doesn't." She pointed to the north arrow in the lower right corner of the projected drawing. "Cole and Mercer's drawing standard uses a north arrow that was designed by one of the firm's original drafters in 2008. I can show the panel the original standard from the firm's template library." She looked at Ethan. He pulled it up on his phone and handed it to Marcus, who connected it to the room's display system. The two north arrows appeared side by side on the screen. They were similar. They were not identical. "The proportion of the arrow head to the shaft," Sloane said, "is .62 in the firm's standard. In the drawings the complainant submitted, it is .71. The line weight of the circle surrounding the arrow is .3 millimeters in the firm's standard. In the complainant's drawings it is .45. She paused. These are small differences. They are the kind of differences you would not notice unless you knew what to look for. But they are consistent across every sheet of the complainant's drawings, which means they are not errors. They are the signature of whoever actually produced these drawings." The room was very quiet. "Furthermore," Sloane continued, "the title block font. Cole and Mercer uses a proprietary font called Mercer Sans, which was commissioned for the firm in 2012. It is not commercially available. The font in the complainant's drawings is Helvetica Neue, which is commercially available and visually similar but not identical. The letter spacing is different. The capital R has a different leg angle. Diana Cross said, "Objection. The respondent is making technical claims that require expert verification." "Then let's verify them," Sloane said. "The panel can request an independent forensic analysis of the drawings. Cole and Mercer will provide complete access to our drawing standards, template library, and original project files. If these drawings came from our system, the analysis will confirm it. If they did not, the analysis will confirm that as well." The panel chair said, "The panel will request an independent technical review of the drawings in question. Until that review is complete, the drawings are admitted provisionally but will not be treated as conclusive evidence." Diana Cross sat down. Her composure was intact, but Sloane, who had been watching her carefully all day, saw her pick up her pen and then set it down again without writing anything. The session broke for a 15-minute recess. Sloane sat down. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she usually was not. Fast, but steady, the rhythm of someone running a long race at a sustainable pace. Ethan sat beside her. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a folded piece of paper. He set it on the table in front of her without comment. She looked at it. Then she unfolded it. It was a sketch. Small, quick, done in pencil, on the back of what appeared to be a meeting agenda, the kind of drawing you make when you are thinking, when your hand needs to be moving while your mind works. It showed the waterfront building in rough elevation, the curve of the lakefront behind it, the public plaza in front. It was not a finished drawing. It was the idea of a drawing, the first breath of something that had not yet become real. Underneath, in handwriting that was precise and slightly angular, 4 words: "This is what we're fighting for." Sloane looked at the sketch for a long time. She thought about her mother's kitchen. She thought about the stone walls. She thought about the 4 years it had taken to get the farmhouse back, and the way her mother had never once stopped believing they would. She folded the sketch carefully and put it in the pocket of her blazer. She did not say anything. Neither did he. But something had shifted between them quietly and without announcement, the way foundations shift, not dramatically, not all at once, but in a way that changes everything that is built on top of them. The panel reconvened, and Sloane Whitfield, junior architect, 3 weeks and 2 days into her first real job, went back to work. The second recess of the day was called at 5:17 p.m., and Sloane needed air the way a person needs air after being underwater for a long time. Urgently, completely, with the specific gratitude of someone who had not been sure they were going to make it to the surface. She went out through the side door of the building, the one that opened onto the parking structure on the building's north side. It was October in Chicago, which meant the air had the particular quality of a city preparing itself for winter, cold and clean and carrying the faint smell of the lake, which was only 3 blocks away, and made its presence known whenever the wind came from the east. She stood between 2 parked cars and breathed. The parking structure was mostly empty at this hour. The afternoon shift having cleared out and the evening shift not yet arrived, her footsteps had echoed on the concrete when she walked in. Now it was quiet. She heard Ethan's footsteps before she saw him. He came through the same side door, his jacket collar turned up against the cold, and found her between the parked cars with her eyes closed and her face tipped slightly upward, which was what she did when she needed to reset. "The panel is leaning our way," he said. "I know. Diana Cross made 3 objections in the last session that she would not have made if she was confident. I know." He stood beside her. For a moment neither of them spoke. The parking structure held the particular silence of a large enclosed space. Not quite quiet, but close, the distant sound of the city muffled by concrete walls. "You were exhausted," he said. "I am fine. You've been running on adrenaline since 9 a.m. That is what adrenaline is for." He almost said something else. Then, from the lower level of the parking structure, a sound reached them, the specific sound of an engine accelerating. Not the gradual acceleration of someone leaving a parking space, but the sudden, purposeful acceleration of something moving fast toward a fixed point. Sloane turned. The black car came up the ramp from the lower level at a speed that made no sense for a parking structure. It was large, dark-windowed, and it was aimed directly at the space between the two parked cars where they were standing. For 1 second, one full, complete, terrible second, Sloane's body did not move. Her brain sent the instruction. Her legs did not receive it. She stood and watched the car come toward her and thought, with the strange clarity of extreme fear, that she had pressed the wrong elevator button this morning, and this was apparently where that led. Then Ethan's arm came across her, and he pulled her sideways, and they went down together behind the concrete pillar at the end of the row, his shoulder taking the impact against the pillar, his other arm still across her back. The car passed within a distance she could not have measured, but could feel, close enough that the displaced air moved her hair. It clipped the side mirror of a parked car at the end of the row, the mirror spinning away across the concrete floor, and then the car was past them and accelerating toward the exit ramp, and within seconds it was gone. The sound of it faded. Sloane was pressed against the concrete pillar, with Ethan's arm still across her shoulders, both of them breathing in the specific way of people who have just understood how close something was. Then Sloane started laughing. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a body that has been running on fear and adrenaline for 8 hours, and has just received one shock too many, and does not know what else to do with the surplus. It came out of her in a way she could not have stopped, even if she had tried. Ethan pulled back enough to look at her. "Why are you laughing?" "Because," she managed, "I pressed the wrong elevator button this morning. I was supposed to be on the 4th floor looking at drainage specifications for a community center in Evanston, and somehow I am now crouched behind a concrete pillar in a parking garage because someone just tried to run me over." She laughed again. "This is a significant upgrade from drainage specifications." Ethan looked at her for a moment. Then, despite everything, he laughed too. It was a short laugh, reluctant, the laugh of someone who recognizes the absurdity of a situation, even when the situation is genuinely dangerous. Then the laughter stopped. "They tried to kill us," Sloane said. "Yes, that was not a warning. That was an attempt. Yes." She looked at the exit ramp where the car had disappeared. "Maggie," she said, "if they were willing to do that to us in a parking structure in broad daylight. I have people looking for her. I've had people looking since this morning. And my mother. The security team confirmed they arrived at the farmhouse 40 minutes ago. 2 people, both vetted personally by me. They will be there until I say otherwise." Sloane absorbed this. She was still pressed against the concrete pillar, and she became aware, in the way you become aware of things when the immediate danger has passed, that Ethan's arm was still across her shoulders, not holding her in place, just there, the way you leave your hand on a wall after you've caught yourself falling. Not because you need to, but because you haven't quite decided to let go yet. She did not move away. "You sent security to my mother's house before I asked you to," she said. "I sent them when you were in the lobby with Hale's attorney, and your phone went into your pocket and your face went very still." He paused. "I've been watching your face all day. I know what it looks like when you are frightened." She looked at him. "What does it look like?" "Like you've decided not to be." She was quiet for a moment. Then she straightened, and he moved his arm, and they both stood up from behind the pillar. "We need to report this," she said, "already calling it in, and we need to get back upstairs. The recess ends in 4 minutes. Sloane," he said. Her name the way you say a name when you want someone to stop moving for a moment. She stopped. "Are you actually all right?" She thought about the photograph of her mother's kitchen. She thought about the car. She thought about the sketch in her blazer pocket, the 4 words in his handwriting. "Ask me again tomorrow," she said. "When this is over." She walked back toward the side door. He watched her go for exactly 3 seconds. Then he followed. What neither of them saw, as they went back inside, was the figure at the far end of the parking structure, standing in the shadow near the lower ramp, watching them, holding a phone to his ear. "She is still standing," the figure said. And the voice on the other end said, "Then we move to the next phase." Victor Hale found her alone. It was not an accident. Sloane understood that immediately. The timing was too precise, the positioning too deliberate. She had stepped away from Ethan for 3 minutes to get water from the lobby fountain, and in those 3 minutes Victor Hale had materialized between her and the elevator bank with the smooth inevitability of someone who had been waiting for exactly this gap. He was, she had to acknowledge, impressive in person. 60 years old, perhaps, with the kind of silver hair that looked like a choice rather than an inevitability, and a suit that had been made for a specific body by someone who charged accordingly. He moved with the ease of a man who had spent his entire adult life being the most powerful person in any room he entered, and who had never had significant reason to doubt this. He smiled at her. It was a warm smile. That was the most unsettling thing about it. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "do you have a moment?" "I have, about 2 minutes before the recess ends," she said. "So yes." "I'll be brief." He fell into step beside her, which she had not invited, moving toward the lobby windows with the gentle pressure of someone steering a conversation toward a destination they have already chosen. "You are talented, genuinely. I have been watching you work today, and I mean that without condescension. Thank you. I could use someone like you at Hale Development. We have a design division that is doing extraordinary work. The compensation would be significantly above what you are currently earning." Sloane looked at him. "Is that a job offer or a bribe? I always get those confused." Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, not yet. More like a recalibration. He had expected something different from her, and he was adjusting. "A genuine offer," he said. "Consider it." "I'll consider it the same way I'd consider any offer made in the lobby of a building where someone just tried to run me over in the parking structure." The warm smile did not disappear. It simply became a different kind of smile, thinner, more precise. "You are fighting for a man you've known for 8 hours," he said. "That is either remarkable loyalty or remarkable naivety." "It is neither," Sloane said. "It is architecture. The drawings are either authentic or they aren't. The payment records are either accurate or they aren't. The evidence is either real or it isn't. I don't need to know Ethan Cole personally to know the difference between a genuine Cole and Mercer North Arrow and a copy." Hale tilted his head slightly. "You are very confident for someone 3 weeks into their first real position." "I am confident because I am right," she met his eyes. "And I think you know I am right, which is why we're having this conversation, instead of the conversation where you win the arbitration and go home." He took one step closer. His voice dropped, not to a whisper, but to the register of a private conversation. "The register that says what I am about to say is between us and will not be repeated. Your mother's farmhouse," he said. "Old Vermont stone. Beautiful property. Those old foundations can be fragile." Sloane held his gaze. She felt, in the soles of her feet and the back of her neck, the specific cold of a genuine threat delivered in a pleasant voice. She felt it the way you feel a structural problem in a building, as a wrongness in the load distribution, a place where the weight was not going where it was supposed to go. She let herself feel it for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "I documented every threat I received today. Screenshots with timestamps. A signed statement witnessed by a colleague. Copies sent to 3 separate addresses, my personal email, a former professor at the Illinois Institute of Technology, and the administrative office of the arbitration panel." She paused. "So if anything happens to my mother's farmhouse, or to my mother, or to me, or to anyone connected to this case, the documentation exists and the trail leads directly to you." Hale was very still. "Furthermore," Sloane said, "I want to mention that we are standing in front of the building's lobby security cameras, which have been recording this conversation for the past 4 minutes. I noticed them when I came in this morning." She glanced up briefly. "Good resolution. The building management upgraded the system last year. I read about it in the facilities newsletter." She read the facilities newsletter. 3 weeks in. She had read the facilities newsletter. Hale looked at her for a long moment. The warm smile was entirely gone now. What was underneath it was not rage. It was something colder and more considered than rage. It was the expression of a man recalculating. "That cologne," Sloane said, "is very expensive. It is a shame it can't cover what is underneath it." She walked away. She walked at a normal pace, with her shoulders straight and her chin level, all the way to the elevator bank, and she pressed the correct button this time, and she stepped in, and the doors closed. And then, alone in the elevator, she leaned against the back wall and let her legs do what they had been wanting to do for the past 4 minutes, which was shake. She pressed her palms flat against the elevator wall behind her. She breathed. She counted the floors. By the time the doors opened on 12, she was steady. From somewhere in the lobby below she heard a burst of laughter. Someone had been close enough to hear the end of the conversation, and then someone else had laughed, and then several people at once. She did not look back. She walked into the conference room, sat down, opened her laptop, and got back to work. Ethan's apartment was on the 41st floor of a building on East Lake Shore Drive, and the first thing Sloane noticed when she walked in was that it did not look like what she had expected. She had expected the apartment of a man who had made several $100 million designing buildings, something architectural, certainly, but also performative, glass and steel, and the kind of furniture that exists to be looked at rather than sat in. Art that had been selected by someone whose job was to select art, surfaces that were clean because no one actually lived on them. What she found instead was a home. The ceilings were high, and the windows were enormous, and through them the lake spread out in the darkness like a second sky, the city lights reflecting off the water in long broken lines. But the walls had drawings pinned to them, not framed, pinned, the way you pin things you are still thinking about, and the bookshelves were full of actual books with cracked spines and paper scraps marking pages, and the kitchen, which she could see from the entry, had the particular warmth of a kitchen that was used. The smell reached her before anything else. Garlic, olive oil, something with tomatoes, the specific richness of a sauce that had been cooking for a while. "You cook," she said. Ethan was already in the kitchen, his jacket gone, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. "You seem surprised. You are a billionaire." "I had a chef," he said, opening the refrigerator. "I fired him." "Why?" "He plated everything in towers. Little towers of food stacked on top of each other. He set a cutting board on the counter. I don't trust a man who builds towers with food. It suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of what food is for." Sloane sat down on one of the stools at the kitchen island. She set her tote bag on the floor She was aware, for the first time since 9 a.m., that she was deeply, comprehensively tired, the kind of tired that lives in the bones rather than the muscles, the kind that comes from spending an entire day running on fear and focus and the particular energy of having no alternative. She watched him cook. He moved in the kitchen the way he moved in the conference room, with the efficiency of someone who has done something enough times that it no longer requires conscious thought. He chopped tomatoes without looking at them. He knew where everything was, without opening the wrong drawer first. "You've been doing this a long time," she said. "Since I was 10, he added the tomatoes to the pan. "My mother worked 2 jobs. Someone needed to make dinner." Sloane was quiet for a moment. "Where did you grow up?" "Pittsburgh. 2-bedroom apartment. 4th floor, no elevator. My father was a contractor." He paused. "He had his own business. Small but good. Residential and light commercial, mostly. He was building something real. What happened to it?" The pause, this time, was longer. He stirred the sauce without looking at her. "A developer. A man named Gerald Ferris, who had been in the business for 30 years and knew every shortcut and every pressure point. He underbid my father on a contract my father had already done the preliminary work for, using cost projections that were fraudulent. Numbers that looked real but were built on subcontractor agreements that Ferris had no intention of honoring. He set the spoon down. My father lost the contract. Then he lost the next one, because Ferris spread the word that my father's preliminary work had been substandard. Then he lost the business." "How old were you?" 12. Sloane looked at her hands on the counter. "Did your father ever recover?" "He found other work. Construction management, for other people's projects. He was good at it, but it wasn't his." Ethan turned the heat down on the sauce. "He never built anything with his name on it again." The apartment was quiet for a moment. Outside, the lake moved in the darkness. "I became an architect," Ethan said, "because I wanted to build what he never got to build. And I named the firm Cole and Mercer. Mercer was my mother's maiden name, because I wanted both of them in it, even after they were gone." Sloane reached into the pocket of her blazer. She took out the sketch, the one he had given her in the conference room, the one she had been carrying all day. She unfolded it on the counter between them and smoothed it flat. "Is this what your father's building was supposed to look like?" she said. Ethan looked at the sketch. He was quiet for a long moment, the specific quiet of someone looking at something that contains more than the thing itself. "No," he said, "that is what I want to build for him." Sloane looked at the sketch. The waterfront building, rough and quick, the public plaza in front, the lake behind, the 4 words in his handwriting. She thought about her mother. She thought about the farmhouse. She thought about the 4 years of fighting, the fraudulent foreclosure documents, the way her mother had sat at the kitchen table every night going through paperwork with a flashlight because they couldn't afford to keep all the lights on, and had never once suggested that they give up. "My mother lost our farmhouse when I was 16, Sloane said. Ethan looked at her. "A real estate company. They used forged documents to initiate a foreclosure, altered the loan terms, changed the payment history, made it look like my mother had defaulted on payments she had actually made. By the time anyone listened to her, the process was already moving." She paused. "We got it back. It took 4 years and every dollar she had, and a lawyer who worked on contingency, because he believed her. But she never trusted a piece of paper again after that." Ethan set down the wooden spoon. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the controlled composure of the conference room. Not the focused intensity of someone managing a crisis. Something more open than that. "That is why you noticed the line weight," he said quietly, "on the drawings." "I've been looking for forged documents my whole life," she said. "I know what they feel like. There is a wrongness to them, a place where the logic doesn't hold, like a building with a bad foundation, exactly like that. They looked at each other across the kitchen island, and something passed between them that neither of them named. The recognition of two people who have been fighting the same battle from different directions for their entire lives, and have only just realized they have been fighting toward the same point. Her phone vibrated against the counter. She looked at the screen. It was her mother. Sloane, there are two people outside the farmhouse, a man and a woman, both in dark coats. They say they work for someone named Ethan Cole, and that they are here to keep an eye on things. Should I be worried, or should I make them tea? Sloane looked up at Ethan. You sent them before I asked, she said. I sent them when you showed me the photograph this morning. He turned back to the stove. The sauce is almost ready. She looked at the message from her mother. She typed back, make them tea. They're there because someone good sent them. I'll explain everything soon. I love you. Her mother's response came in second. He sounds like a good man. I feel better. Also, I made shortbread this morning. I'll bring them some. Sloane set the phone down. She was aware of a pressure behind her eyes that she recognized as the specific feeling of being cared for when you are not used to being cared for. The feeling of a weight you have been carrying alone being, without warning, shared. She did not cry. She was too tired to cry, and also she was in a billionaire's kitchen, and she had some standards. But it was close. Thank you, she said, for the security team, for all of it. Ethan set 2 plates on the counter, pasta with tomato sauce, simple and perfect. The smell of it filling the kitchen with the particular warmth of food made by someone who learned to cook because someone needed to be fed. My mother's recipe, he said. The only thing she had time to teach me. Sloane looked at the plate. She looked at the sketch, still unfolded on the counter between them. She looked at the man across from her who had grown up in a Pittsburgh apartment making dinner for his tired mother, and had built an empire and was still, at the end of a day that had included fabricated evidence and a near miss in a parking garage, making pasta from his mother's recipe for a junior architect he had met 9 hours ago. She must have been extraordinary, Sloane said. She was. He sat down across from her. She would have liked you. Sloane picked up her fork. How do you know? Because she had no patience for people who weren't honest. And you, he said, are the most honest person I have met in a very long time. Outside, the lake moved in the darkness. The city lights reflected off the water. The sauce was perfect. Neither of them spoke for a while, and the silence was the comfortable kind, the kind that doesn't need to be filled, the kind that means something. Sloane woke to the sound of the city, not an alarm, not a phone. Just Chicago in the early morning, the distant movement of traffic 41 floors below, the particular quality of light that comes off the lake when the sun is still low, and the water is still dark, and the smell of coffee moving through the apartment like a quiet announcement. For a moment she did not know where she was. Then she did, and the memories of the previous day returned in the specific order that memories return after something significant, not all at once, but in sequence, each one arriving with its full weight. The conference room, Diana Cross, the parking garage, the photograph of her mother's kitchen, the sketch, the pasta, the conversation that had lasted until nearly midnight, moving from the waterfront project to Pittsburgh to Vermont, to the particular question of what it means to build something that lasts, and which had ended only when Sloane had fallen asleep mid-sentence on the couch in Ethan, had apparently covered her with a blanket and left her there. She was in the guest room now. She did not remember moving. On the chair beside the bed, folded neatly, was a blazer. Navy blue, structured, the kind of blazer that meant business without announcing it. Beside it, a white blouse. On top of both, a note in the handwriting she now recognized, precise, slightly angular. Thought you might want armor for today. Breakfast is ready when you come down. There is also coffee, which I suspect you need more than the armor. E. Sloane read the note twice. Then she folded it and put it in the pocket of the blazer next to the sketch, which she had transferred there the night before, without quite deciding to. 15 minutes later, dressed and carrying both pieces of paper in her left pocket, like a set of coordinates, she came downstairs. Ethan was at the stove. His back was to her, and he was making eggs with the focused attention of someone who takes eggs seriously, and the kitchen smelled of bacon and coffee and the faint trace of last night's tomato sauce still warm in the air. He turned when he heard her on the stairs. The smile that crossed his face was not the controlled, minimal smile of the conference room. It was faster than that, and less managed, and it did something to the morning light in the kitchen that Sloane chose not to examine too carefully. "The blazer fits," he said. "Perfectly." She sat at the island. "Do you keep spare women's blazers for all the junior architects who spend the night?" "I had Marcus order it at 11 p.m." "He did not ask questions." Ethan set a plate in front of her. "Eggs, bacon, toast, a small bowl of fruit. He never asks question. It is his best quality." "What is his worst?" "He tells everyone everything." Immediately, Ethan poured coffee. "By 9 a.m. this morning, the entire firm will know you slept here." Sloane looked at him over the coffee cup. "Is that a problem?" He met her eyes. "Not for me." She held his gaze for a moment. Then her phone vibrated on the counter, not a threat this time, not an unknown number, but Danny Park calling at 7:14 a.m. with the particular energy of someone who had not slept and was not bothered by this. She answered. "I found more," Danny said, without preamble. "I've been here since 4 a.m. I know that sounds alarming, but I brought snacks, so I am fine." "What did you find?" "The vendor code alterations. I traced them back to a specific workstation. Not just a general IP address, an actual physical workstation registered to a specific employee at Hale Development. A man named Curtis Webb, who is listed in Hale's organizational records as Director of Data Management." Sloane set down her coffee. "Can you prove the trace?" "I have the server logs, the modification timestamps, the workstation registration records, and a very clear chain of custody from the original backup files to the altered versions." A pause. "I also found something else. The modifications were always made on days when Ethan was publicly documented as being out of the city. Conferences, site visits, client meetings. Whoever was doing this had access to his calendar. Someone inside the firm. That is what the pattern suggests. I cross-referenced the calendar access logs. Only 4 people had standing access to Ethan's executive calendar during the relevant period. His assistant Marcus, the director of operations Maggie Voss, and Danny Paws. A consultant who was brought in for 3 months last year to advise on the waterfront project's financial structure. His contract ended in January. His name is listed in the firm's records as an independent contractor. Do you have his name? Thomas Hale. Victor Hale's nephew. The kitchen was very quiet. Sloane looked at Ethan across the island. He had heard enough of the conversation to understand the shape of it, and his expression had gone very still in the way it went still when he was processing something significant. "Danny," Sloane said, "print everything. 2 copies. Bring one to the hearing, and leave one with someone you trust who is not coming to the hearing." "Already done. I left a copy with my sister. She lives in Naperville. She has no idea what it is, but she is very responsible." "Perfect. We'll see you at 9." She ended the call. Ethan said, "Thomas Hale." His nephew had access to your calendar for 3 months, long enough to map your schedule, identify the gaps, and time every alteration to a window when you couldn't be immediately reached to dispute it. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Victor brought him in himself. He recommended the consultant. I trusted his recommendation. I know. He was in this building, in my office, looking at my calendar. Yes, Ethan picked up his coffee cup. He set it down without drinking from it. He was my mentor, he said, for 8 years. Sloane did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say. Some betrayals are too specific to be addressed with general words, and this was one of them, the particular wound of someone who taught you everything, and then used what they knew about you to take everything away. She reached into her pocket. She took out the sketch and set it on the counter between them. "This is what we're fighting for," she said, repeating his own words back to him. "That is still true. Everything else is just evidence." He looked at the sketch. He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "it is." They finished breakfast. They got in the car. And as the city came up around them on the drive to the building, the lake on their right, the skyline ahead, the waterfront site visible for a moment between two older buildings, a long stretch of lakefront waiting to become something. Sloane felt the sketch in her pocket and thought about her mother's stone walls, and thought about foundations, and thought about what it means to build something that lasts. She thought she was beginning to understand. The final session of the arbitration opened at 9 a.m., with the particular atmosphere of a room, in which everyone present understood that something was about to be decided. The panel members had the focused attention of people who had spent the previous evening reviewing documents. Diana Cross had the composed expression of someone who had spent the previous evening doing the same thing and had found, in that review, reasons to be less comfortable than she had been the day before. Victor Hale was in the observers section again, in another impeccable suit, but his stillness today was different from his stillness yesterday. Less the stillness of a man who has already won, and more the stillness of a man who is working very hard to appear as though he has already won. Sloane noticed the difference immediately. Danny Park arrived at 8:57, carrying his printed reports in a manila folder and his NASA tote bag over one shoulder, and he walked to the witness area with the careful deliberateness of someone who had spent the morning reminding himself to watch where he was going. He made it to the chair without incident. He sat down. He looked at Sloane. She gave him a small nod. He straightened his glasses and opened his folder. The panel chair called the session to order. The respondent indicated yesterday that additional evidence would be presented this morning. "Miss Whitfield, you may proceed." Sloane stood. "Thank you. The defense calls Danny Park as an expert witness." Diana Cross rose. "Objection. Mr. Park provided informal testimony yesterday that was not properly entered into the record. The complainant has not had adequate time to prepare cross-examination. Mr. Park is a certified financial analyst with 7 years of experience in construction project. Accounting," Sloane said. "His testimony is directly responsive to the financial evidence the complainant submitted. The panel has the authority to admit expert testimony at any point in the proceeding when it is relevant and the witness is qualified." The panel chair looked at his colleagues. A brief, silent exchange. Objection overruled. Mr. Park may testify. Danny took the oath in a voice that only wavered slightly on the word solemnly, which Sloane thought was understandable given the circumstances. She approached. "Mr. Park, you performed a financial analysis of Cole and Mercer's contractor payment records over the past 48 hours. Can you describe what you found?" Danny opened his laptop, which Marcus had connected to the room's display system. "Yes. I started with the 3 transactions that the complainant identified as fraudulent payments to city officials. In the current version of Cole and Mercer's financial records, these transactions are categorized under a vendor code that corresponds to personal service payments, which is why they look, on the surface, like payments to individuals rather than contractors. The panel was watching the screen. Diana Cross was watching Danny. However, Danny continued, Cole and Mercer's financial system maintains an automatic backup on a server that was decommissioned from active use 18 months ago but was never wiped. I accessed this backup server and found the original versions of these transactions. He clicked to the next screen. In the original records, these same transactions, same amounts, same dates, same reference numbers, are categorized under vendor codes, corresponding to legitimate construction subcontractors. Specifically, 3 firms that were providing environmental survey services during the waterfront project's preliminary phase. He clicked again. The vendor codes were changed. The modification timestamp shows the changes were made on April the 3rd of this year. 2 weeks after the complaint was filed on March the 20th, the panel chair said, "The records were altered after the complaint was filed." Yes, which means the complaint was filed based on records that did not yet exist in their current form. Someone filed the complaint and then altered the records to match the complaint. The room was very quiet. Diana Cross said, "Objection. The witness is drawing conclusions that go beyond his expertise." "The witness is describing what the timestamps show," Sloan said. "The timestamps are data. Mr. Park is qualified to read data." "Objection overruled," the panel chair said. "Continue." Danny took a breath. I also traced the workstation that made the modifications. The IP address and workstation registration records show the changes were made from a computer registered to a Hale Development employee named Curtis Webb, Director of Data Management. The murmur that went through the room was low and sustained, like the sound a building makes when something in its structure shifts. Victor Hale did not move. Diana Cross said, "The witness cannot establish a verified chain of custody for these server records." "The chain of custody is documented in the server logs," Danny said, with the particular calm of someone who has spent 2 days preparing for exactly this question. "The backup server has not been accessed since it was decommissioned. The access logs show 2 entries, the original data entry dates, and my access 48 hours ago. There is no gap in the record. There is no evidence of tampering with the backup itself." Sloan let that sit for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Park, you also analyzed the timing of the modifications in relation to Ethan Cole's schedule. What did you find?" Danny clicked to a new screen, a calendar overlay, the modification dates highlighted in red against a timeline of Ethan's documented public appearances. Every modification to the financial records was made on a day when Ethan Cole was publicly documented as being out of Chicago. Conferences, site visits, client meetings in other cities. The pattern is consistent across all 12 modifications I identified. What does that pattern suggest? That whoever was making the modifications had access to Ethan Cole's executive calendar and was deliberately timing their actions to windows when he would be unreachable. And who had access to that calendar? Danny looked at his notes. 4 people with standing access during the relevant period. Marcus Chen, executive assistant. Patricia Okafor, director of operations. Margaret Voss, senior partner. He paused. And a consultant who worked with the firm from October through January of last year. His name in the firm's contractor records is Thomas Hale. The silence that followed was absolute. Victor Hale stood up in the observers section. It was the first time he had moved since the session began, and the movement itself was significant. The movement of a man whose composure has reached its limit, who has been watching the architecture of his plan disassemble piece by piece, and has finally run out of stillness. The panel chair said, "Mr. Hale, observers are not permitted to." "This is fabricated," Victor Hale said. His voice was still controlled, but only just. "These records have been manufactured by the respondent to deflect from their own. Mr. Hale," the panel chair's voice was sharp, "you will sit down or you will be removed from this proceeding." Hale sat down. But something had broken in the room, the invisible architecture of his authority. The structure that had held everything in place had developed a crack that everyone present could see. Sloane turned back to Danny. "One more question. You mentioned that Maggie Voss had calendar access. Have you found any evidence connecting her to the modifications?" "No," Danny said. "Her access logs show she used the calendar for scheduling purposes only. There is no record of her accessing the financial system at any point during the relevant period." "Thank you, Mr. Park." Sloane turned to the panel. "The defense would like to note for the record that Margaret Voss, senior partner at Cole and Mercer, was reported missing this morning. She did not appear for this proceeding. Her apartment showed signs of a hasty departure, and her office computer was wiped. The defense believes she discovered the fraud being perpetrated against this firm and was prevented from testifying." Diana Cross said, "Objection. This is speculation." "It is a documented fact that she is missing," Sloane said. "The speculation is about why. I will leave that question to the panel." She returned to her seat. Ethan leaned toward her. His voice was barely above a breath. "The drawings," he said. "Don't forget the drawings." She had not forgotten the drawings. She stood again. "The panel has provisionally admitted the architectural drawings submitted by the complainant, pending independent technical review. The defense would like to address those drawings directly." She connected her own laptop to the display system. The two north arrows appeared side by side, the Cole and Mercer standard, and the version in the complainant's drawings. "Yesterday I identified 7 technical discrepancies between the complainant's drawings in Cole and Mercer's established drawing standards. The panel has those observations in the record." She paused. "This morning I want to add one more." She pulled up a new comparison. "The complainant's drawings include a project number in the title block. WF 2024 -001. This is a real Cole and Mercer project number. It is the correct number for the waterfront project. However, Cole and Mercer's internal numbering system assigns project numbers sequentially, and the sequence is logged in the firm's project management system." She clicked to the next screen. "According to that log, project number WF 2024 -001 was assigned on January the 8th of this year. The drawings the complainant submitted are dated December of last year, 6 weeks before the project number existed." The panel chair looked at the screen. He looked at Diana Cross. Diana Cross looked at the screen. She looked at her notes. She looked at the screen again. She said nothing. "A drawing cannot bear a project number that was assigned 6 weeks after the drawing was supposedly created," Sloane said, "unless the drawing was created after the project number was assigned and backdated, which is, I would suggest, exactly what happened." She turned to look at Victor Hale. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the warm smile, not the cold calculation, something rawer than either of those things. The expression of a man watching something he built for a very long time come apart in a single morning. "The defense rests," Sloane said. She sat down. The panel chair called a recess for deliberation, and as the room began to move around her, Diana Cross conferring urgently with her team, the panel members gathering their documents, observers rising from their seats, the door at the back of the room opened. Maggie Voss walked in. She looked like she had been traveling for a long time. Her coat was wrinkled, her hair was not its usual precise arrangement, and there were shadows under her eyes that suggested a night spent somewhere other than her own bed. But she was walking steadily, and her expression, when she found Sloane across the room, was the expression of someone who has arrived late to something important, and is taking the measure of what they missed. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of Sloane. "Tell me," she said, "the vendor codes, the calendar, access, the project number on the drawings." Sloane paused. "Thomas Hale." Maggie closed her eyes briefly. "I found the calendar access logs 3 days ago. I was going to bring them to Ethan that morning. Someone was in my apartment when I got home. Are you all right?" "I am angry," Maggie said. "Which is better than the alternative." She looked at Ethan. Then back at Sloane. "You held the line." "I had good blueprints," Sloane said. Maggie looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, with the particular weight of someone who does not give this kind of assessment lightly, "You did more than that." She sat down. The panel returned 17 minutes later. The panel chair set his documents on the table with the deliberate care of someone who understands the weight of what he is about to say. "The panel has reviewed the evidence presented by both parties in this proceeding," he began. "We have considered the financial records, the architectural drawings, the server logs, and the testimony provided. We have also considered the significant questions raised about the provenance and authenticity of the complainant's primary evidence. Diana Cross was very still. Victor Hale was very still. Sloane was very still, but for a different reason. She was holding the sketch in her left hand, inside her blazer pocket, her fingers pressed flat against the paper, and she was thinking about her mother's stone walls and her father's contractor business, and the 4 words in Ethan's handwriting, and the 200 people whose names she did not know. "The panel finds," the chair continued, "that the complainant has not met the burden of proof required to establish that Cole and Mercer architecture violated the terms of the waterfront development contract. The financial records submitted by the complainant have been shown to contain modifications made after the complaint was filed, which raises fundamental questions about their reliability. The architectural drawings submitted as evidence contain anachronistic project numbers that are inconsistent with their stated creation dates. The panel cannot treat either body of evidence as conclusive." He paused. "The complaint against Cole and Mercer Architecture is dismissed. The waterfront development contract award stands." The room erupted. Not in the dramatic way of courtroom scenes in films, not with cheering or applause. In the way of a professional proceeding where everyone present is a professional and the eruption takes the form of simultaneous movement. Simultaneous conversation, the particular controlled energy of a room in which a significant thing has just happened, and everyone is processing it according to their own interests. Danny Park made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite anything else, and covered his face with both hands. Maggie Voss let out a long, slow breath, and looked at the ceiling. Ethan did not move for a moment. He sat very still, looking at the panel chair, and then he looked at Sloane, and what was on his face was not triumph. It was something quieter than triumph, something that looked like relief and grief and gratitude all at once, the expression of a man who has been fighting for something for a very long time and has just been told he does not have to fight any more. Sloane looked back at him. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Diana Cross was already on her phone, speaking in a low, rapid voice. Her team was gathering documents with the efficient urgency of people who need to be somewhere else immediately. Victor Hale stood up. He walked toward the exit with the measured pace of a man who has decided that his dignity requires him to leave before anything else happens. He was almost to the door when it opened from the outside. 2 people walked in. A man and a woman, both in dark coats, both with the particular bearing of people who are accustomed to walking into rooms and having the room adjust to them rather than the other way around. The woman held up a credential wallet. "Victor Hale," she said, "Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with an ongoing investigation into financial fraud, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice." The room went very quiet. Victor Hale looked at the two agents. He looked at the credential wallet. He looked at the room, at Diana Cross, who had stopped speaking into her phone, at the panel members who had not yet risen from their seats, at Maggie Voss, who was watching him with the expression of someone who has been waiting for this for 3 days. And then he looked at Sloane. She met his eyes. "You pressed the wrong elevator button," he said. It was not quite an accusation, and not quite an observation. It was the statement of a man trying to understand how a thing that should have been simple had become this. "Best mistake I ever made," she said. The agents moved to either side of him. He did not resist. He walked out between them with his hands cuffed in front of him and his suit still impeccable, and his face showing nothing, and the door closed behind him with a firmness that felt, in the silence that followed, like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Danny Park took his hands away from his face. "Did I do well?" he said, to no one in particular. Maggie Voss said, "You were extraordinary, Danny. I thought I was going to be sick at least 4 times. You hid it very well." "I was thinking about my sister in Naperville the whole time. She has the backup copy. I kept thinking if I mess this up, she has the backup copy. It will be okay." He paused. "Is it weird that thinking about my sister calmed me down?" "It is not weird at all," Sloane said. She was looking at the door through which Victor Hale had just walked, and she was thinking about her mother's farmhouse, and about the foreclosure documents, and about the 4 years it had taken to get it back, and about the fact that sometimes the people who take things from you are held accountable and sometimes they are not. And today, in this room, they were. Ethan came to stand beside her. He did not say anything for a moment. They stood together, looking at the door. "Your father," Sloane said. "Gerald Ferris, the man who took his business. What about him? Did he ever face any consequences?" Ethan was quiet. "Number." She nodded. Then today was for both of them. He looked at her. Something moved across his face, something she had not seen there before, something that was not composure or control or the managed expression of a man who has learned to show only what he chooses to show. Something unguarded. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. Just his hand around hers, steady and warm, in the middle of a conference room in Chicago while the room moved around them, and Danny Park asked Maggie Voss if she thought he could go home and sleep for approximately 1,000 years. Sloane looked down at their joined hands. She thought, "This is a terrible idea." She thought, "I have known this man for 31 hours. She thought, he makes his mother's pasta recipe, and he draws buildings on meeting agendas, and he sent security guards to Vermont at 6 in the morning without being asked." She did not let go of his hand. What neither of them knew, what they could not have known standing there in the aftermath of a victory that felt complete, was that the real complication was still coming. It always is. 2 days later, the world looked completely different. Sloane was at her desk on the 4th floor at 7:49 a.m., working on the drainage specifications for the Evanston Community Center that she had been supposed to be working on the morning she pressed the wrong elevator button when Danny appeared in the doorway of her office with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Danny's default expression was a kind of distracted contentment, the expression of someone whose mind is usually somewhere more interesting than the room they are physically in. The expression he was wearing now was not that. "Don't look at your phone," he said. Sloane looked at her phone. The headline was from a Chicago lifestyle publication that specialized in the intersection of business news and personal gossip, and it read, "Junior Architect's Real Secret Weapon, a Night at the Boss's Penthouse." The article was 300 words long. It did not need to be longer. It had a photograph taken from the street, slightly blurry, showing Sloane and Ethan arriving at the building together on the morning of the final arbitration session. They were walking close together. His hand was near the small of her back, not touching, but near. The photograph had been taken by someone who knew they were coming and had been waiting for them. The article suggested, in the careful language of something designed to be unprovable, that Sloane's role in the arbitration had been secured not through competence, but through a personal relationship with Ethan Cole that had begun before the hearing. It quoted an anonymous source described as a Cole and Mercer insider. It noted that Sloane had been at the firm for less than a month. It did not mention the fabricated evidence. It did not mention the backup server. It did not mention the project number anachronism, or the North Arrow, or the 200 jobs, or the waterfront that was now going to be built. It mentioned the penthouse. Sloane set her phone face down on the desk. Danny was still in the doorway. It went up at 6 a.m. It has been shared about 4,000 times. I know. It is not true. I know that too. Sloane. Danny, she said it quietly, without sharpness. Give me a few minutes. He gave her a few minutes. She sat at her desk and looked at the drainage specifications and did not see them. She thought about the article. She thought about the anonymous source described as a Cole and Mercer insider. She thought about who had known she spent the night at Ethan's apartment. Marcus, who told everyone everything, which meant everyone, which meant anyone who wanted to use it. She thought about Victor Hale, who had been arrested 2 days ago and released on bail within 6 hours, and who had, according to the news coverage, retained 3 separate legal teams and issued a statement through his publicist describing the arbitration outcome as the result of procedural irregularities. She thought about the fact that a man who had spent 6 months building a fraudulent case against Ethan Cole would absolutely, without hesitation, spend his first 2 days of freedom building a different kind of case. She thought about the 4 years her mother had spent fighting a foreclosure. She thought about the way the system had made her mother prove, over and over, that she was telling the truth, while the people who had lied faced no equivalent burden. She thought about the fact that she had walked into that arbitration room because it was the right thing to do, and that this was apparently not a sufficient defense against the suggestion that she had done it for other reasons. Her phone vibrated. Ethan. She looked at the message. I am handling it. Don't worry. She put the phone back down. 20 minutes later, Marcus forwarded her the statement that Ethan's public relations team had issued. She read it twice. It was carefully worded. It confirmed that Sloane had represented the firm in the arbitration and that her work had been exceptional. It noted that Cole and Mercer stood behind her contributions. It was, in the language of public relations, a full-throated defense of her professional conduct. It said nothing about the nature of their relationship. It was written, she understood, to protect the firm, to avoid confirming or denying anything that might create additional headlines, to be, in the careful calculus of corporate communications, neutral. It was the right statement for the firm. It was not the right statement for her. She read it a 3rd time. Then she stood up, picked up the sketch from her desk. She had taken it out of her blazer pocket the previous evening and set it on her desk because she had not known what else to do with it, and walked to the elevator. She pressed 32, the correct button this time. Ethan's office was at the end of the executive hallway, a corner room with windows on 2 sides, and the lake visible in the distance. He was at his desk when she walked in, his phone to his ear, and he looked up when he saw her and said something brief into the phone, and ended the call. "I was going to come down," he said. "I know." She closed the door behind her. She stood in the middle of the room. I read the statement. It defends your work completely. Everything you did in that room. It doesn't say it isn't true. She said it without anger, which was harder than saying it with anger. The article implies I was there for personal reasons. Your statement defends my professional conduct. It doesn't say the personal implication is false. Ethan was quiet. "You chose the neutral position," she said. "I understand why. I understand the calculus. The firm, the board, the investors, the project, I understand all of it." She paused. "But you let them think it." Sloane. "I walked into that room because it was right. I stayed because 200 people needed someone to stay. I found the evidence because I know what forged documents look like, and I have known since I was 16 years old." Her voice was steady. She had decided it would be steady. "And now the story is that I was there because of you. And your statement doesn't say otherwise. I was trying to protect you from what? From people knowing that something happened between us." She looked at him. "Or from the consequences of publicly choosing me over the clean narrative." He did not answer immediately. That pause, that single, brief, honest pause, told her everything. "I see," she said. She crossed to his desk. She set the sketch down on the surface between them, face up, the forewords visible. "I think this belongs to you," she said. She walked out. She went back to the fourth floor. She wrote a resignation letter that was one paragraph long and entirely professional. She sent it to Maggie Voss because Maggie was the person she trusted most in the building, and because she could not send it to Ethan. She packed her tote bag, the one with the architecture conference, lanyards, and the project folders, and the yellow legal pads, and she took the elevator to the lobby. She pressed the correct button. She walked out into the Chicago morning, which was cold and gray and smelled of the lake, and she went to her apartment and booked a train to Vermont. She did not look at her phone for the rest of the day. Danny Park sat at his desk on the third floor and looked at the resignation email that Maggie had forwarded to the team and said, to no one in particular, "Oh, no." Maggie Voss, in her office on the 12th floor, read the same email and then walked down the hall to Ethan's office and closed the door behind her and said, in the voice she used when she was not going to say something twice, "You made a mistake." Ethan was looking at the sketch on his desk. "I know," he said. "Are you going to fix it?" He picked up the sketch. He looked at it for a long time. "Yes," he said. "Then you should probably start now," Maggie said, "because she has a 4-hour head start, and she is from Vermont, which means she knows how to disappear into a landscape and not be found unless she wants to be." Ethan was already reaching for his coat. The train from Chicago to Burlington took 11 hours with a connection in Albany, and Sloane spent most of it looking out the window at the landscape changing. The flat Midwestern geometry giving way to the particular topography of the Northeast, the hills coming up gradually, and then all at once the trees bare in November, the sky the specific gray of a season that has made its decision and is not interested in negotiating. She did not look at her phone for the first 4 hours. Then she looked at it once, saw 17 messages from numbers she recognized, and did not want to respond to, and put it back in her bag. She looked out the window. She thought about the North Arrow. She thought about the project number. She thought about Danny Park's napkin and the backup server that nobody used, and the way the truth had been sitting there in the dark for months, patient and undisturbed, waiting for someone to go looking. She thought about Ethan's face when the panel chair read the verdict. She thought about his hand around hers in the conference room. She thought about the statement his public relations team had issued, and the pause before he answered her, and the sketch on his desk. She looked out the window. The hills of Vermont appeared in the late afternoon, and something in her chest that had been tight since Monday morning loosened slightly. The specific relief of returning to a landscape that knows you, that does not require explanation. That was there before everything complicated began and will be there after. Her mother was waiting at the station in Burlington in the old green truck that had been old when Sloane left for college, and was now something beyond old, something that had crossed into the territory of character. Carol Whitfield was 63 years old, with gray hair she wore in a practical braid, and the particular physical presence of a woman who had spent decades doing real work with her hands and had no interest in apologizing for it. She was wearing a canvas coat and work boots, and she was holding a thermos of tea. She handed Sloane the thermos without speaking. Sloane took it. She held it with both hands. The warmth of it went through her palms and up her arms, and she stood on the station platform in the November cold and breathed. "You look terrible," her mother said. "Thank you, Mom." Not in a sick way. In a fought-hard way. Carol studied her daughter with the particular attention of someone who has been reading this face for 27 years. "Did you win the case?" "Yes." But. Carol took the thermos back, poured tea into the cap, handed it to Sloane. "Get in the truck. Tell me on the way." Sloane told her on the way. Not everything, not the parking garage, not the photograph of the kitchen, not the full measure of how frightened she had been, but enough. The arbitration, the evidence, Victor Hale, the statement, the sketch, on the desk. Carol drove and listened and did not interrupt, which was one of her great qualities. When Sloane finished, Carol was quiet for a mile or so, the truck moving through the dark Vermont roads with the easy familiarity of a vehicle that knows the way home. Then she said, "You are angry." "I am fine." "You've been saying you are fine since you were 14 years old, and it has never once been accurate." Carol turned onto the road that led up to the farmhouse. "You are angry because he chose the safe answer. He chose the company. Did he? Or did he make a mistake? It is the same thing." "No, it isn't." Carol pulled the truck to a stop in front of the farmhouse and turned off the engine. In the silence the Vermont night was very present, the sound of wind in the bare trees, the distant sound of the creek that ran along the property's eastern edge, the smell of cold air and wood smoke from the chimney. Your father made mistakes. Plenty of them. He was not a perfect man. The difference between a mistake and a choice is whether the person comes back. Sloane looked at the farmhouse. The lights were on in the kitchen. The stone walls her grandfather had built ran along the front of the property, some sections solid and original, some sections repaired over the years with slightly different stone, the repairs visible if you knew what to look for, but not ugly, just honest. The way a thing that has been tended looks different from a thing that has been left alone. "He is not going to come back," Sloane said. "He has a company to protect and a board to manage and a $700 million project, breaking ground in 6 weeks. He doesn't have time to drive to Vermont." Carol opened the truck door. "Come inside." I made shortbread. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Carol had gone through foreclosure paperwork by flashlight, the same table where Sloane had done her architecture school applications, the same table that had been in this kitchen for 40 years and had absorbed more of the family's history than any other object in the house. Carol poured tea. She set out the shortbread. She sat across from her daughter and looked at her with a direct, patient attention of someone who has all the time in the world and knows it. "Tell me about him," she said. "Mom, not about the case. About him." Sloane wrapped her hands around her mug. She looked at the shortbread. She thought about Pittsburgh and pasta and a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who lost his business to a man named Gerald Ferris, and a son who became an architect to build what his father never could. She thought about the sketch, the 4 words. "He draws buildings on meeting agendas," she said. "When he is thinking." "His hand just moves," she paused. "He fired his chef because the chef plated food in towers. He said he doesn't trust a man who builds towers with food." Carol's mouth curved slightly. "He sent security guards to your house at 6 in the morning without being asked," Sloane said. "Before I even knew he was going to do it. Before I asked." She looked at her tea. "He made his mother's pasta recipe for dinner. He said it was the only thing she had time to teach him." Carol was quiet for a moment. "He sounds like a good man who made a bad decision under pressure." "Good men make bad decisions." "Yes," Carol said, "they do. The question is what they do next." She picked up a piece of shortbread. "Your phone has been vibrating in your bag since you got off the train. I can hear it from here." Sloane looked at her bag. "It has been vibrating for 3 days," Carol said. "You haven't looked at it." "I know." Sloane, her mother, said her name with the specific weight of a woman who has earned the right to say hard things. "A man who sends security guards to a stranger's farmhouse in Vermont at 6 in the morning is not a man who chose the company over you. He is a man who panicked and made the wrong call, and is now, I suspect, trying to figure out how to fix it." Sloane did not answer. "Look at your phone," Carol said. Sloane reached into her bag. She took out her phone. 47 messages from Ethan. She did not read them in order. She scrolled the most recent one, sent 53 minutes ago. "I am in Vermont. I am outside. I brought the sketch." Sloane looked up from the phone. Through the kitchen window, in the dark of the November evening, the security light above the barn had come on. It came on when something moved in the driveway. Carol picked up her tea. She looked at her daughter over the rim of the mug with the expression of a woman who has been waiting for this moment since Burlington Station and is very pleased with how it is going. "Well," she said, "go." He was standing at the stone wall. Not at the front door, not at the truck, not in the driveway, in the obvious place where a person stands when they are waiting to be let in. He was at the stone wall along the front of the property, the one her grandfather had built and her mother had repaired, and that Sloane had spent the past 3 days adding to, because when she needed to think she needed her hands to be moving, and stone walls required both attention and effort and left no room for anything else. He was standing in the section she had been working on, the eastern end where the original wall had partially collapsed over the winter, and she had been restacking the stones in the order that made structural sense. The large flat ones at the base, the smaller ones fitted into the gaps, the whole thing held together by weight and geometry rather than mortar, the way her grandfather had built it. He was looking at the wall. He had driven from Chicago. She could see it in him, the particular exhaustion of a long drive, the coat that had been slept in, the jaw that had not been shaved since the morning of the arbitration. He looked, she thought, like a man who had made a decision and driven toward it for 11 hours without stopping to reconsider. He heard her footsteps on the frozen ground and turned. He was holding the sketch. Not in his pocket, not in a folder, holding it in his hand, the small framed version she had not seen before, the sketch now behind glass in a simple dark frame, the kind of frame that says this matters and I wanted to protect it. She stopped a few feet from him. The November night was cold and clear, the kind of cold that makes the stars look closer than they are, the kind of clear that makes sounds carry farther. Somewhere on the property the creek was moving, and the bare trees were moving in the wind, and the security light above the barn cast a long pale rectangle across the frozen grass between them. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Ethan said, "I chose wrong." He said it simply, without preamble, without the careful construction of a man managing his words. Just the fact of it, stated plainly. "I told myself I was protecting you," he said, "from the media attention, from the additional scrutiny, from being made into a story. I told myself the neutral statement was the professional choice, and the professional choice was the right choice. He paused. I was protecting myself. I was afraid of what it would mean to publicly choose you, to say, in front of the board and the investors and the press, that this person matters to me and I am not going to pretend otherwise. Sloane was quiet. I have been building things my entire life, he said. Buildings, companies, contracts, reputations. I know how to build things. I know how to protect things. I know how to manage the variables and control the outcomes and make the calculation that keeps the structure standing. He looked at her. I did not know how to do this. I made the wrong call, and I am sorry. The wind moved through the bare trees. The creek moved in the dark. You drove 11 hours, Sloane said. 11 hours and 20 minutes. There was construction outside of Toledo. You could have called. I tried calling. You didn't answer. I could have texted. I sent 47 texts. You didn't answer those either. So you drove to Vermont. Yes. She looked at him. What did you do about the statement? I issued a new one this morning. Before I got in the car, he reached into his coat pocket and took out his phone, found the page and held it out to her. She took the phone. She read. The statement was not long. It was in the language of public communications, unusually direct. It said that Sloane Whitfield had walked into an impossible situation and handled it with intelligence, courage, and integrity that had nothing to do with her relationship to the firm's leadership and everything to do with who she was. It said that the suggestion otherwise was false and had been planted by a man currently facing federal fraud charges. It said that Ethan Cole was personally and professionally proud to know her. It said in the final sentence that he hoped she would give him the opportunity to tell her that himself. Sloane read the final sentence twice. She handed the phone back. The board, she said. 2 members called this morning to express concern about the optics. I told them the optics were fine and that if they disagreed, they were welcome to raise it at the next board meeting. And they didn't disagree, he paused. Maggie told them what you did in that room, in detail. By the time she finished, the optics were not the primary topic of conversation. Sloane looked at the stone wall. She looked at the section she had been working on, the eastern end. The rest-stacked stones, the structure held together by weight and geometry, and the logic of how things fit together. You should have said something sooner, she said. I know. When I came to your office. You should have said it then. I know. You had the opportunity and you didn't take it. I know, he said it, each time without defense, without qualification. Just acknowledgment, clean and complete. She looked at him. He was standing in a Vermont field in November in a coat he had been driving in for 11 hours, holding a framed sketch of a building that did not yet exist, and he was looking at her with the expression she had first seen in the hallway outside the conference room, the expression of a man who has run out of options and is watching one stand in front of him, and hoping. What did you write? She said. On the sketch. When you were in Vermont, you wrote something, and I read it, but I never told you what I thought about it. He held out the frame. She took it. She turned it over. On the back, beneath the original 4 words, "This is what we're fighting for." He had written something new, in the same precise angular handwriting. Sometime in the past week, I was wrong about what I was fighting for. She read it twice. She turned the frame back over and looked at the sketch, the waterfront building, rough and quick, the public plaza. The lake, the first breath of something that had not yet become real. She thought about her mother's kitchen table, and the foreclosure documents, and the 4 years of fighting, and the way her mother had never once suggested they give up. She thought about Pittsburgh and pasta and a father who never got to build anything with his name on it. She thought about the wrong elevator button, and the unrolled blueprints, and the North Arrow, and the project number, and Danny Park's NASA tote bag, and the way the truth had been sitting in the dark, waiting for someone to go looking. She thought about 31 hours, and 11 hours, and 47 messages, and a man standing at a stone wall in Vermont in November holding a framed sketch. She put the sketch under her arm. She picked up a stone from the pile she had been working from, a flat, solid piece of Vermont granite, the kind that fits well at the base of a wall, the kind that holds weight without shifting. She held it out to him. He looked at it. "If you are going to stand at my grandfather's wall," she said, "you might as well be useful." He took the stone. Their fingers touched in the transfer, and neither of them moved for a moment. And the November night was cold and clear, and the creek was moving in the dark, and the stars were very close. "I am sorry," he said again, quietly, just for her. "I know," she said. "Put the stone down." He set it at the base of the gap in the wall. It fit well. She set the next one beside it. He found the one after that without being told, because he was an architect and he understood, without needing it explained, how things fit together. They worked in silence for a while, rebuilding the eastern section of the wall, the frozen grass crunching under their feet, their breath visible in the cold air. After a time, Sloane said, "The statement was good. Maggie helped." "Of course she did." A pause. "The last line was yours." "Yes." She set a stone. He set a stone. The wall grew. "I am not going back to the firm," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I know. Not because of this. Because I was always going to leave eventually. I want to start my own practice. Small. Residential, mostly. The kind of work where you know the people you are building for. Vermont? Maybe. Chicago. I haven't decided." She looked at him sideways. "I am telling you so. You know it is not about the statement. I was always going to go." "I know," he said again. "I am not asking you to stay. What are you asking?" He set the last stone in the gap. He stepped back and looked at the wall, the repaired section, solid and level. The new stones fitted into the old structure the way repairs should fit, visibly different, but not wrong, honest. He picked up the framed sketch from where he had set it on top of the wall. He held it out to her. She took it. "Open it," he said. She looked at him. She turned the frame over and found the small tabs on the back that held the backing in place, and she worked them open carefully, and she lifted the backing away. Behind the sketch, folded small, was a piece of paper. She unfolded it. It was a drawing, not a quick pencil sketch this time, but a proper architectural drawing, done with care and precision, the kind of drawing that takes hours. It showed a building she did not recognize, small, 2 stories, with large windows and a generous front porch, and a stone foundation that looked unmistakably like Vermont granite. Beside the front door, a small sign. She leaned closer to read it. "Whitfield Architecture." She looked at him. "I drew it on the drive," he said. "I had to stop twice to finish it. There is a rest stop outside of Erie, Pennsylvania, that has surprisingly good lighting." She looked at the drawing. She looked at the building with her name on it. She looked at the stone foundation that looked like her grandfather's walls. "This is not a proposal," Ethan said. "I want to be clear about that. This is a drawing of a building. It is a drawing of a building that I would very much like to exist in whatever city you decide to put it in, because I think you should build the things you want to build, and I think the world will be better for it." "And the proposal," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "That comes later, when you are ready. When we've had more than 31 hours and a parking garage and a Vermont stone wall." He paused. "When I've earned it." Sloane looked at the drawing for a long time. She thought about what it meant that he had stopped twice on a highway in Ohio and Pennsylvania to finish drawing a building with her name on it. She thought about what it meant that he had drawn a stone foundation that looked like her grandfather's walls, which meant he had been listening, really listening, the night she talked about Vermont. She thought about the wrong elevator button. She folded the drawing carefully and put it in her coat pocket. Next to the framed sketch, she stepped forward and kissed him, standing in a Vermont field in November with the farmhouse behind her and the stone wall beside her and the creek moving in the dark and the stars very close. And he put his arms around her and held on with the specific care of someone who has just been given something back that they were not sure they deserved. Her mother, watching from the kitchen window with a cup of tea, and the expression of a woman who has been right about something for several days, turned away and went to put the kettle on again. Some things did not need to be witnessed. They were doing fine on their own. The waterfront site in April looked nothing like it had in October. In October it had been a long stretch of lakefront waiting, a cleared site, a construction fence, a project sign with a rendering that showed what it would become. In April it was a beginning. The foundation work had started in February, and now the site had the particular energy of something that has moved from idea to fact, from drawing to ground, from the 4 words on the sketch to the actual turning of actual earth. The groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled for 11 a.m. on a Saturday, which meant that by 10:30 the waterfront was full of people, city officials and firm partners and contractors and journalists, and the 200 employees of Cole and Mercer Architecture who had spent the past 6 months working toward this morning, and their families, and a significant number of Chicago residents who had followed the story of the arbitration and the arrest and the waterfront project, and had decided on a Saturday in April that they wanted to be present when the shovel went in. Danny Park was there in a new shirt that he had tucked in, which Sloane noticed and appreciated. He was standing with Maggie Voss near the temporary stage, and Maggie was straightening his collar with the efficiency of someone who has given up asking people to dress themselves properly and has decided to simply intervene. Carol Whitfield was there, having taken the train from Burlington the previous evening. She was wearing her good coat, the navy one she kept for occasions, and she was standing near the back of the crowd with a cup of coffee from the cart near the entrance, looking at the lake with the expression of a woman who has driven a long way to see something and finds it worth the drive. Sloane found her there 20 minutes before the ceremony began. "You came," Sloane said. "You asked me to come." Carol looked at her daughter. "You look different." "Different how?" "Settled." Carol considered the word. "Like you know where you are." Sloane looked at the waterfront site, the foundation work, the construction fence, the lake beyond it, the city skyline behind. She thought about October and the wrong elevator button and the unrolled blueprints and the north arrow and the parking garage and the Vermont stone wall. She thought about the office she had signed a lease on 2 months ago, in a building in Lincoln Park, 2nd floor, with large windows, and a view of the street, and a sign on the door that said Whitfield Architecture in clean sans, serif letters that she had chosen herself. She thought about the 3 residential projects she had taken on in the first month, all of them small, all of them for people who had found her through the story of the arbitration, and had called because they wanted someone who understood the difference between a real foundation and a forged one. She thought about the drawing that was framed on the wall of her new office, not the waterfront sketch, but the other one, the one Ethan had finished at a rest stop outside of Erie, Pennsylvania, the building with her name on it and the Vermont Granite Foundation. "I know where I am," she said. Carol squeezed her hand once. "Go. They're starting." The ceremony opened with remarks from the city's Commissioner of Planning, who spoke about the public benefit of the waterfront development and the importance of green space and affordable housing and the Performing Arts Pavilion, and who did not mention the arbitration or Victor Hale or the 340 pages of fabricated evidence, because this was a celebration, and celebrations are not the place for that kind of accounting. Then Ethan spoke. He stood at the podium with the lake behind him and the city in front of him and 200 people who had spent the past 6 months building toward this morning, and he spoke about his father. He did not speak about it the way you speak about something you have rehearsed. He spoke about it the way you speak about something you have been carrying for a long time, and have finally decided to set down in public in daylight where everyone can see it. He talked about Pittsburgh. He talked about a contractor who built things with his hands and his name, and his belief that the work was worth doing. He talked about what it means to lose something to someone who takes it through dishonesty, and what it means to spend your life trying to build it back, and what it means to finally be standing on the ground where the building is going to go up. He talked about the people who had made it possible. He named Maggie Voss, who had found the fraud, and had paid for finding it, and had come back anyway. He named Danny Park, who had trusted a feeling and followed it to a backup server that nobody used and had written the key figures on a lunch napkin. He named the 200 employees who had kept working through 6 months of uncertainty because they believed in what they were building. And then he said, "But the most important thing I learned this year is that the best buildings, the ones that actually stand, are built with someone beside you who knows the difference between real foundations and forged ones." He turned from the podium. He looked at Sloane. The crowd stirred. Danny Park, standing near the stage, made a small sound that Maggie Voss correctly identified as the precursor to him saying something out loud, and she put her hand on his arm, and he was quiet. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He took out the framed sketch, not the drawing of Whitfield architecture. That one was on her office wall where it belonged. The original sketch. The waterfront building in rough pencil, the public plaza, the lake, the first breath of something that had not yet been real, and was now, on this April morning, becoming real under their feet. He held it in both hands, and looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her. "I drew this 4 years ago," he said, "on the back of a meeting agenda because my hand needed to be moving while I was thinking. And what I was thinking about was what I wanted to build and why." He paused. "I wrote 4 words on it. This is what we're fighting for. And for 4 years, that meant the building, the project, the waterfront, my father's name in the cornerstone." The crowd was very quiet. "And then a woman pressed the wrong elevator button," he said, "and walked into a room she was not supposed to be in, and unrolled a set of blueprints across the conference table, and decided, for reasons that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with who she is, to stay." Someone in the crowd laughed. Then someone else. She found the evidence in a backup server nobody used. She identified a forged drawing by the angle of a north arrow. She stood in a lobby and told the most powerful man in the room that his cologne smelled of guilt in front of a security camera, and then walked away. He paused. "She rebuilt my grandfather's stone wall in Vermont in November. She is currently running her own architecture practice out of an office in Lincoln Park that has better natural light than mine, which I consider an oversight on my part." More laughter, louder now. "I wrote something new on this sketch," Ethan said, 6 months ago, in Vermont, standing at a stone wall, in the dark. I wrote I was wrong about what I was fighting for." He looked at Sloane. "I have been thinking about those words every day since. And I think what I meant, what I should have written, was this." He reached into his other pocket. He took out a small box. The crowd went completely silent. Danny Park covered his mouth with both hands. Maggie Voss crossed her arms and looked at the sky with the expression of someone who is very pleased and is trying not to show how pleased they are. Carol Whitfield, at the back of the crowd, set down her coffee cup very carefully. Ethan walked down from the stage. He walked to where Sloane was standing, and he stopped in front of her, and he looked at her with the expression she had first seen in the hallway outside the conference room. The expression of a man who has run out of options, and is watching one stand in front of him. Except It was not that anymore. It was something else now. Something that had been built over 6 months of phone calls and dinners and a Vermont stone wall and a drawing finished at a rest stop in Pennsylvania and 47 unanswered messages. And one answered one. He knelt. "Sloane Whitfield," he said, "you pressed the wrong elevator button and saved my firm. You fought for 200 people you had never met. You rebuilt a stone wall in Vermont in November and then told me to be useful." He paused. "You are the most honest person I have ever known, and the most determined, and you make me want to be better at both of those things." He opened the box. The ring was simple, a solitaire in a clean setting, the kind of ring that does not announce itself, that is designed to be worn every day by someone who works with their hands. "I have been fighting my whole life to build something that lasts," he said. "I finally understand what that means." He looked up at her. "Will you help me build the rest of it?" The crowd held its breath. Sloane looked at the ring. She looked at the framed sketch in his other hand. She looked at the waterfront site behind him, the foundation work, the beginning of the building, the public plaza that was going to be there for the people of Chicago for the next 100 years. She looked at him. "You are impossible," she said. "I know. You drove to Vermont in a coat you'd been sleeping in. It was a very good coat. You finished a drawing at a rest stop in Ohio, Pennsylvania, outside of Erie. You sent security guards to my mother's house before I asked you to. Your mother made them shortbread. They still talk about it." Sloane looked at him for one more moment. Then she said, "Yes." She said it simply, without hesitation, the way you say something that has been true for a long time, and you are only now saying out loud. He stood up. He put the ring on her finger. She looked at it on her hand, the clean setting, the simple stone, the kind of ring designed to be worn every day by someone who works with their hands. He held out the framed sketch. She took it. He kissed her in front of 200 Cole and Mercer employees and a crowd of Chicago residents and one city planning commissioner and Danny Park, who had removed his hands from his mouth and was applauding with the full force of someone who has been waiting for this since a Tuesday morning in October when a set of blueprints unrolled across a conference table and changed everything. Maggie Voss uncrossed her arms. Carol Whitfield picked up her coffee cup and took a long, satisfied sip. The crowd erupted, not in the controlled way of a professional proceeding, but in the full, generous, unmanaged way of people who have been watching something build toward this moment and are glad to be present when it arrives. Sloane pulled back and looked at the sketch in her hand. The waterfront building, the public plaza, the lake, the 4 words, and then the new words beneath them, and then she turned it over, on the back, in the space below the drawing of Whitfield architecture, with its Vermont granite foundation, something new, written in the same precise angular handwriting, "For the building we build together." She looked at him. "You wrote that before you left Chicago," she said. "I wrote it before I got in the car." You were that sure. He looked at her with the expression she had catalogued over 6 months, the controlled smile, the open one, the one in the kitchen when she came downstairs in the navy blazer, the one at the stone wall in the dark. "I was that hopeful," he said. She folded the sketch carefully and put it in her coat pocket. Somewhere behind them Danny Park was telling Maggie Voss that he had known from the moment the blueprints unrolled across the conference table that this was going to happen, and Maggie was saying that he had absolutely not known that, and had in fact said on the morning of the arbitration that he thought the whole situation was going to be a disaster. And Danny was saying that was a different kind of knowing. The first ceremonial shovel broke the ground. The crowd cheered. The lake moved in the April morning, gray and unhurried, the way it moved when it had no idea that something extraordinary had just happened directly beside it. and Sloane Whitfield, who had pressed the wrong elevator button on a Monday morning in October and ended up exactly where she was supposed to be, stood on the waterfront with a ring on her finger and a sketch in her pocket and the city behind her and the lake in front of her, and understood, with the particular clarity of someone who has found the thing they were looking for without knowing they were looking, that the best buildings are not the ones that were planned perfectly from the beginning. They are the ones that were built honestly, stone by stone, by people who knew the difference between a real foundation and a forged one, and who stayed. What did you think of this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to keep up with all our stories. And don't forget to check out more heartwarming stories right here on the end.